I remember the first time our hands brushed, not by accident, not really. It was the kind of touch that felt both wrong and inevitable, like the air between us had been waiting for that moment to happen. She was standing by the window of the art room, sorting through a stack of photographs, her fingers careful, deliberate. The afternoon light made her look softer than usual, shadows gathering in the curve of her jaw, the lines of her expression half hidden in gold. She had that quiet grace that made people hesitate before speaking. The kind that demanded silence, not out of fear, but out of reverence. I told myself I was just helping. Passing her another frame, holding the light steady. But my eyes betrayed me before my hands ever did. I noticed the faint streak of paint near her wrist, the small scar near her thumb, the way her blouse, pale and loose, moved with the rhythm of her breathing. "Does this one belong here?" I asked, but my voice came out lower than I meant it to. She looked up then, not quickly, but slowly, as if she already knew the question wasn't about the photograph. Her name was Clara. 40. Maybe 41. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was the kind that lived in small movements, the tilt of her head, the way she smiled without showing all of it. "You're overthinking again," she said, her voice quiet but textured, like a whisper through paper. "Just go with what feels right." I wanted to say I am. But I didn't. Instead, I nodded and turned back to the table, pretending to study the frames. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full, thick enough that I could almost hear her heartbeat in it. Outside, the light began to fade, turning the room into something softer. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume, sandalwood and something floral I couldn't name. It wasn't strong, but it lingered, the way memories do when they don't want to leave. She stepped closer to adjust one of the pictures, and for a moment, her arm brushed against mine. Bare skin. Barely there. But enough to make the rest of the world disappear. Neither of us moved. Her breath caught. I heard it, faint, like the start of a confession that never reached words. Then she turned her head slightly, eyes meeting mine. It wasn't a look meant for anyone else. It said too much. My chest felt tight, like something important had just shifted, like the rules of the room, of the world, had quietly rearranged themselves. She broke the eye contact first, straightening a frame that didn't need straightening. "You should get going soon," she murmured. "It's getting late." "I don't mind staying." Her lips curved, just enough to be a smile, though her eyes didn't match it. "That's what worries me." I laughed softly, but it wasn't a joke. We both knew it. For a while neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. The sky outside went from gold to violet. And I realized I didn't want to leave, not yet. Then, a knock on the door. We both froze. A man's voice, distant but familiar, called her name. She inhaled sharply, her hand still resting on the edge of the table, inches from mine. Our eyes met again. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because in that silence, in that heartbeat before everything broke, her touch had already said everything her words couldn't. The next day, she pretended nothing had happened. The same calm voice, the same quiet grace. Only this time, she avoided my eyes just enough for me to notice. We were cataloging old gallery photos again. The same faint smell of dust and varnish hung in the air, the same hum of the old heater. But between us, a silence that wasn't comfortable anymore. I kept replaying the way her hand had brushed mine, the look in her eyes before that knock on the door. It had been real. It had to be. But when I tried to catch her glance now, she only smiled, polite, distant. "Are you free tomorrow?" she asked, voice neutral, eyes on the photographs. "I could be." "Good. The archive needs reorganizing. It's easier with two people." She said it like a request, but it sounded like an excuse. Later, over coffee, I learned little pieces of her past without her meaning to share them. Her wedding ring was gone, but the faint line where it used to be wasn't. When I asked about it, gently, she paused, stirring sugar into her cup long after it had dissolved. "He's somewhere else now," she said finally. "We both are." I wanted to ask more, but something in her tone made it clear, don't. She looked out the window then, where the late afternoon light hit the street, golden and unkind. You're too young to understand how tiring silence can be, she said softly. You'll learn someday. I almost told her that silence was all I'd ever known, but I didn't. Instead, I watched the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how her fingers trembled just slightly when she reached for the cup. She wasn't as composed as she wanted to seem. That evening, when we locked up, she handed me a folder and our fingers brushed again, only this time, she didn't pull back immediately. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but her hand lingered on mine. For one breath, maybe two. Then she drew in a sharp breath, as if remembering herself, and turned away to set the key in the door. You should get some rest, she said. So should you, I replied. She gave a short laugh, quiet, broken in the middle. That's harder than it sounds. The next morning, she wasn't at her desk. A single note rested there instead. In the East Wing. Bring the sketches. When I found her, she was standing on a ladder, reaching for a frame above her head. Sunlight pooled on the floor beneath her. I moved closer to steady the ladder, my hand resting near her ankle, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat of her skin through the air. She looked down at me, half smiling, half worried. Always rescuing people, she murmured. Only the ones who don't ask for it. Something passed between us then, something wordless and certain. Her gaze softened. The distance between us disappeared, if only for a heartbeat. And for the first time, she didn't look away. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that pretends to be ordinary. We were in her office, sorting through old sketches, the afternoon light slanting through half-closed blinds. Dust floated in the air like memory. Her hair was tied back loosely, one strand falling against her cheek every time she leaned over the desk. I wanted to reach out, to tuck it behind her ear the way she had before, but my hand didn't move. Hold this, she said, handing me a small frame. Our fingers met in the middle. Neither of us let go. The air changed, heavier, slower. I could hear her breathing now, the rhythm slightly uneven. You're quiet today, she said, eyes still on the frame. I don't trust what I'd say if I wasn't. That made her look up. For a second, either of us moved. There was nothing left to hide behind, not the work, not politeness, not the years between us. Just her eyes, searching mine as if trying to remember something she'd spent years trying to forget. Then, a knock on the door. She flinched, pulling her hand back. I turned away, pretending to study the sketch. Come in, she called too quickly. It was her assistant, cheerful and oblivious. Mrs. Hale, you have a call. Line 2. Thank you, Claire, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hand still trembled when she reached for the phone. The assistant lingered a moment too long before leaving. When the door closed again, the silence felt sharper. She exhaled, finally, and leaned back in her chair. We can't keep, I know, I said before she finished. But neither of us stepped away. Later that evening, we were alone again, checking the gallery lights before closing. The hum of electricity filled the space, low and intimate. I found her standing by the large window, the city lights painting her reflection in gold and shadow. You ever think about leaving? I asked. Leaving what? Everything that makes you hold your breath before speaking. She gave a soft, humorless laugh. You talk like someone who still believes in clean escapes. Maybe I just believe in moments, I said, moving closer. Her reflection flickered in the glass, two figures standing too close to be proper. Moments don't last, she whispered. Then maybe they're the only things that do. She turned toward me, slow, uncertain, like she was fighting herself with every step. Her hand lifted slightly, as if to touch my face, but stopped halfway. I could feel the warmth of her fingers in the space between us. Don't, she said, but her voice betrayed her, soft, shaking, wanting. I won't, I said. But I didn't move back. The clock on the wall ticked once, loud enough to break the stillness. She looked at me, really looked, eyes searching for a reason not to feel what she already did. And when the lights flickered out for the night, neither of us moved. We stood there, close enough to feel the pull, far enough to pretend we didn't. The rain started before sunset, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat that wouldn't settle. She hadn't planned for me to stay this late. Neither had I. But the storm gave us an excuse neither of us wanted to question. Her living room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of a single lamp. She sat by the window, legs curled under her, a book open but unread in her lap. I sat across from her, pretending to watch the rain but tracing every detail of her instead, the curve of her wrist, the way her sweater slipped slightly off one shoulder. "You should go before it gets worse," she said quietly. "You want me to?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked out at the rain again. "That's not the same question." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, full of everything we'd both been refusing to say. I stood, walked to the window beside her. She didn't move. When I spoke, my voice came out lower than I meant it to. "You keep looking away when I'm near you." Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting mine. "Because it's easier than looking at what I can have." "Then stop pretending you don't want it." That made her inhale sharply, eyes flashing, anger, fear, longing, all at once. "You don't understand what this could cost me. I'm not asking for forever," I said, stepping closer. "Just this moment. Right now." She stood, suddenly, like the air itself was burning her, and for a second, I thought she might walk away. Instead, she whispered, "You shouldn't make promises you don't understand." "I'm not promising anything," I said. "I just can't stop thinking about you." Something broke in her expression then, a small, trembling sigh that wasn't quite surrender but wasn't resistance either. When I reached out, she didn't stop me. My fingers brushed the side of her face, tracing the line of her jaw. Her skin was warm, softer than I imagined. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to feel. "Don't," she whispered again, but her voice shook on the word. "Then tell me to leave," I said. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The space between us dissolved. Only the rhythm of rain, the faint hum of electricity, and the soft catch of her breath as she leaned closer. "You have no idea what you're doing," she murmured. "Maybe I do." Her hand lifted, fingers brushing against my chest, not pushing me away, just resting there, trembling. For a moment, the world narrowed to that touch. Nothing else mattered, not the age, not the risk, not the storm outside. Her eyes opened, shining, conflicted, alive. "Say it," I whispered. She did. Just one word, my name, and it sounded like a confession she'd been holding for years. And then, a knock at the door. Loud. Unexpected. We froze. The moment shattered, suspended between what almost happened and what still could. The knock still echoed in my mind long after the door had opened and closed again. It was only a neighbor, dropping off a package by mistake, but it had shattered something fragile that neither of us could rebuild right away. She moved first, putting distance between us, wrapping her sweater tighter around her shoulders. "You should go," she said again, softer this time. "Before this turns into something we can't take back." But her voice betrayed her. It trembled, not from anger, but from something closer to fear. I hesitated, watching the way her hands gripped the edge of the counter. She wasn't just pushing me away. She was protecting something. "What are you so afraid of?" I asked quietly. She looked at me, then away. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me." The room felt too small, too charged. The rain outside was still steady, but inside, the silence was heavier. Finally, she spoke. "You remind me of someone I used to love." That stopped me. "Used to?" Her laugh was hollow, one short breath that carried years of pain. "He left. Said he'd come back when he was ready. He never did." I took a step closer. "That's why you don't trust this." "That's why I don't trust myself," she said. "Because I keep looking for him in you." The confession hung in the air, a quiet, devastating truth that made everything click into place. The hesitation, the half-finished glances, the way she flinched whenever I said something too kind. "I'm not him," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know." But the way she said it sounded like both a relief and a heartbreak. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the kind of emotion people hide for years. She turned away, running a hand through her hair, and I saw it then, the exhaustion of wanting something she didn't believe she deserved. When I reached out, my fingers brushed her wrist. "Then stop pretending this doesn't mean anything." Her pulse jumped under my touch. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Then tell me." She faced me again, and something in her had shifted. Her defenses weren't gone, just cracked enough to let the truth show through. "If we cross that line," she said slowly, "I won't be able to go back. And neither will you." I could feel her trembling, even from a step away, not from cold, but from the pull between us that neither of us could name anymore. Her breath caught when I moved closer, our shoulders nearly brushing. "Then maybe it's not about going back," I said. "Maybe it's about finally stopping running." Her lips parted like she might respond, but instead, she reached up, pressed her hand against my chest again, this time not to stop me, but to steady herself. "Don't make this choice for me," she whispered. "Then make it yourself," I said. The thunder outside rolled low and long, like the world holding its breath. And in that silence, she looked at me, really looked, and I saw her decision forming before she spoke it. "I can't keep pretending this is wrong." Then she stepped closer, closing the space between us, slow, deliberate, unafraid. And that was when I knew, the line we'd been dancing around all this time wasn't meant to be avoided. It was meant to be crossed. The world outside had quieted, rain fading into a soft drizzle, thunder reduced to memory. Only the clock on the wall dared to move, ticking through the silence that held us suspended between one breath and the next. She stood in front of me, close enough that I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. The faint scent of jasmine clung to her sweater, the kind that lingered long after she'd left a room. Neither of us spoke. Words had lost their use hours ago. What mattered now was the quiet, the kind that hummed like electricity between two people who'd run out of excuses. Her hand was still on my chest, where she'd left it earlier, and I could feel her pulse, steady, then stuttering when I didn't move away. "This isn't fair to you," she whispered. I almost laughed, but it came out too soft. "You don't get to decide what's fair for me." She looked up, and for a moment, every defense she'd built melted. Her eyes, those calm, unreadable eyes, finally let me in. And what I saw there wasn't resistance. It was longing, raw and unguarded. She took a breath, and the air between us shifted, heavier, charged. My hand lifted without thought, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her breath itched, her lips parting slightly at the touch. It wasn't a decision anymore. It was gravity. "You should stop," she said, but it came out too quietly to sound real. "Do you want me to?" Her silence was answer enough. The space between us vanished, not in a rush, but in slow inevitability. The world blurred to the rhythm of our heartbeats, to the soft sound of rain against the windows. Her forehead rested against mine for a heartbeat, and I could feel the tremor that ran through her, the battle she was still fighting inside herself. "I told myself I wouldn't let this happen again," she murmured. "And yet," I started. "And yet," she finished, closing her eyes. I felt the warmth of her hand slide up to my neck, fingers tracing the edge of my jaw. Every movement was hesitant, tender, like she was still trying to convince herself it was real. "If we do this," she said finally, her voice barely above a breath, "there's no pretending afterward. I don't want to pretend anymore." She exhaled, not from relief, but surrender. A soft sound that said more than any confession could. For a long moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there, too close to step back, too afraid to ruin what had already changed. Her thumb brushed against my skin, slow and deliberate, before her voice broke the quiet one last time. "You make me forget how to be careful." "Maybe that's the point," I said. And with that, the space between us disappeared completely, not as an ending, but as the truth finally finding its way out of hiding. By the time the rain stopped, we both knew, whatever happened next, we understood each other completely. ChatGPT said, the morning light found us before we were ready for it. Soft and golden, it spilled through the half-open curtains, tracing her profile as she sat by the window, coffee untouched. I watched her from the couch, the quiet curve of her shoulders, the way her fingers circled the mug but never lifted it. Everything about the night before hung in the air, fragile, unspoken, but real. There was no pretending it hadn't happened. No turning it into a dream. When she finally turned toward me, her eyes didn't look away. There was still hesitation there, but also something gentler, acceptance, maybe. "You're quiet," she said. "So are you," I answered. She smiled faintly, the kind that never quite reached her eyes but carried warmth all the same. "You're too young to be this calm about something so complicated." I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. "Maybe I just stopped seeing it as complicated." Her brow furrowed slightly, and I could see her wrestling with everything she tried to keep controlled. Age, perception, reason, all those invisible lines we drew for ourselves. But then she sighed, and something in her softened. "You make it sound simple." "It feels simple," I said. "When it's real." The silence that followed wasn't heavy like before. It was full of everything we hadn't said, everything we'd already understood. She stood and crossed the space between us slowly, like she was testing the air. Then she sat beside me, close enough that her knee brushed mine. The contact was small, almost nothing, but it carried the weight of 1,000 things we'd both been too afraid to admit. Her hand hesitated before finding mine. Her fingers were warm, steady, threading between mine like she'd done it 1,000 times before. "I don't know where this goes," she said quietly. "Neither do I," I admitted. "But I don't want to keep pretending it shouldn't exist." Her gaze lifted, and in it was everything I'd seen since the first day, the grace, the restraint, the quiet vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "You'll regret this someday," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. "But not today." That made her laugh, just barely, a soft sound that felt like light breaking through clouds. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time, there was no tension between us. Just peace. Just the warmth of being next to someone who finally stopped running from what they felt. We didn't say anything else. Words had already done their part. The world outside moved on, the distant hum of traffic, the low sound of wind against the window, but inside, it felt like everything had slowed to the rhythm of her breathing against my side. My thumb brushed the back of her hand once, gently, grounding us both. She looked up, just long enough to meet my eyes. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for seeing me." And I did, truly, completely. We stayed like that, quiet and still, until the morning became day, and for once, it felt enough.